What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nuts and Bold Sports. Raj and Jordan.
You hear that much?
He's not even gonna let me get through the intros.
I think we know what that is. That's Jimmy Butler. Sorry.
I think let's just not even do intros. Let's just go straight into it. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the big story here is Miami taking the win over the Bucks in 5 games. Pretty dominant victory. Giannis Antetokounmpo did not play in that final game. What's interesting about this Miami team is coming into this as a 5 seed, and they were basically tied with Indiana, so they could have had home court here in the playoffs. But they look better than any other team does, and I think it's a combination of the sort of good coaching and sort of talent that they have on the team. It was a good mix to obviously stop Milwaukee. We've seen a lot of articles come out over the past few days, and they've sort of pretty steadily broken down what Miami did to stop Milwaukee, just taking baskets away from every other player, forcing Giannis to shoot from farther out from the basket than he would have felt comfortable. And they just feel like they have a scheme that is far more finesse than any other team does. I'm just curious, what are your sort of thoughts on the way that series broke down? And do you think that this Miami team could be sort of one of these teams that, although we're going into these series underestimating them, they could make a real run at the finals?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just saw them, take away Game 5 because Giannis wasn't playing, so they weren't at full strength. For all intents and purposes, they dominated the series from start to finish, and it wasn't. I don't think, and thankfully, I haven't seen any of these takes yet where people are saying, maybe it'd be different if they weren't in the bubble, if they had to go play in different arenas. None of that matters. I don't think this was a fluke by any stretch. Miami came out with a great game plan. They executed on both sides of the ball, especially on defense, like you talked about, taking away kind of all of Giannis's moves, kind of exposing Giannis and kind of showing us what how far Giannis still has to go in terms of his offensive game. So they did a great job. They're well coached, and I think it starts from the complete top. I think this is what happens when you have an organization that has an owner in Mickey Arison who values winning but doesn't get in the way. He lets his front office do the work, which is pretty rare when you really think about it with NBA franchises. They have obviously Pat Riley in the front office running things, just a legend with an impeccable resume. And you have one of the best coaches in the league in Spoelstra, and now you've paired him with Jimmy Butler, a guy that wants to be coached hard, that wants to be coached well, and wants to be surrounded by these other tough-nosed winners, and they surrounded him with the right pieces. They're dangerous. I don't know if they're going to get Toronto or Boston. It seems like Boston right now because it looks like Boston's going to close out tonight against the Raptors. But whoever comes out of that series is definitely going to be worthy. But I could definitely see Miami doing it. I feel like they have to be the slight favorite right now. They did everything well. There really wasn't anything they didn't do well in this series. They shot the ball well from the field. They shot 46%. They shot 37% from 3. They shot 85% from the foul line. Their big names showed up. Jimmy had a fantastic series, playmaking, hitting jumpers when they needed to, and just being the defensive, mastermind that he is when they just needed that. You had, the shooters like Dragic and Robinson and those guys step up. You had, rookie and Tyler Hero, who rookies don't generally do that well in the playoffs. He was phenomenal, especially yesterday's game. And not to take away from yesterday's game just because Giannis didn't play. That's still tough. Milwaukee came out playing a much more freestyle. They came out, nothing to lose, backs against the wall, and we're shooting the ball really well. Middleton was getting it going, and Miami they weathered the storm. They stayed composed, and they just started to beat Milwaukee again and doing all the little things, and they earned this. This is phenomenal. They're probably the team that I've enjoyed watching most in the playoffs. I tune into every second that they're playing. They're so good. I can't say enough good things about them.
They seem to have this sort of thing down where they have like all the individual pieces that make for a great team. I think sort of the process of gelling and figuring out players' roles and making sure that Spoelstra had a good handle on his guys is probably why they ended up at that 4 or 5 seed in the regular season. But looking at where they are now and the way that they came into this Milwaukee, I mean, first off, they swept Indiana, and Indiana, although they were missing some players, they're not a team to sleep on. But on top of that, they just came into both of these series looking so ready for whatever challenge is coming up to them, and that's because they have all the pieces that I think they could take on any other team, whether it's Boston or Toronto. I think Boston will give them the better fight between the two. That said, I think that they should be expected to be the favorites against even a Boston team just because they took down this Milwaukee team. And I imagine that they play Boston in a similar fashion where they're taking away a lot of baskets from Jason Tatum. You're going to have guys like Jaylen Brown and Kemba Walker that are still going to be threats. But I think that Miami has enough pressure to be able to, even if those guys are scoring at a high rate, if you're taking away Boston's best player in Tatum, I think that does cause some problems for the Boston Celtics. And I think that it makes for a much more interesting series than even that Milwaukee one was. It was just a lot of fun to watch them. Like you said, like they just looked like they were firing on all cylinders, and they have the floor general in Dragic, although he is getting up there in age and he had some up and down games. He still looked like a leader out there. Jimmy Butler obviously being the actual leader of that team. Then they have the young guys who can shoot. They have Bam who can play defense and can play offense. He can facilitate. He can score. He can basically do anything. They just have every single piece, and I think that that's what's going to take them. I don't want to get too ahead of myself and say they're definitely going to the finals, but I think they have a very good shot. Obviously, the big sort of question here in front of everybody now is, what does Milwaukee do? We talked about it a little bit last time. We talked about the Chris Paul situation and whatnot, and how neither of us are fans of that. What does Milwaukee do, really? Because I think now that we've stepped away from the series, it's officially over, we can kind of look at it with a little bit more clarity. How does Milwaukee improve from here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know you and I were talking about Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer, his article today, kind of going more in depth about what Milwaukee's, salary-wise, if they're looking like draft pick-wise, and they don't have a ton. They don't really have a lot of room for improvement. The people that they can make work for Chris Paul, I guess, in this situation are like the Bledsoes, the DiVincenzo's, the Ilyasova, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But like, does it, that's only for a Chris Paul trade. If you want to, like, no one's going to answer the phone if they just call and say, hey, we're trying to get rid of Bledsoe. Do you want him? Like, the guy's been abysmal in the last 2-3 years in the playoffs.
Yeah, he's bad. He's really, really bad. I mean, he's going to give you some on defense, but on offense, he just completely disappears. He's nothing. He's absolutely nothing on.
And it's every year. It's every year after the first round. The first round he might be good, and then the second and third rounds, it's always the same thing. So nobody's going to want him. You don't really want to get rid of Middleton. I think he's still a nice enough player. He's maybe not the top, like. If Giannis is going to be your one, like Middleton maybe shouldn't be the two, as O'Connor pointed out. He might be better suited as like the 2B or the 3. But they don't have a lot of draft picks. I think they only have the Indiana one, I think, as a result.
Yes, and over the next few years, they have very few as well. It's not just this upcoming season, so they have very few assets moving forward for the next 3 to 4 seasons that they can actually dish away and get like young guys or anything like that.
Right. You almost have to kind of hope they run into a situation kind of like Miami did this year, where you had a team in Memphis that was like, hey, we're unloading an Iggy type of player, and here's Crowder, and we'll kind of give them to you for not a lot. And you see how well that worked out for Miami. I mean, Iggy, we haven't even seen the Iggy game yet. Like that's just on cruise control until the next round.
Yeah.
But Milwaukee needs some of that. And don't get me wrong, like there is also the part where. If Giannis is you assume Giannis is going to get better in the offseason. He's going to work on maybe not necessarily 3-point shooting, but it could be just more jumpers around the paint, more confident moves that aren't just barreling down.
KOC made the point of like ahead of 3-point shooting, even he needs to just work on his free throw shooting.
Yeah. That's something that didn't. It came into play a little bit this series, but not as much because of how the series ended up going, especially with him getting hurt. But that's something where if this was like, if he doesn't get hurt, if this is a 6-7 game series, the closing minutes of those games, I would be extremely nervous if I were a Bucks fan that he had to go to the line because he's not a good free throw shooter. So yeah, it's tough. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer or any kind of right or wrong speculation. There's been a lot of talk of like this has been a mistake that they let Brogdon go and didn't, they thought it was too much to re-sign him. And I see both sides of it. He was very injury prone. He missed more time this year with Indiana, but we also saw him in round 1, even though Indy got swept. He was one of the few guys that actually played pretty well in that series. Yeah. So it would have been nice to have in round 2 against Miami. So they'll look back on that as well. It's tough. We're also in the moment too. We're also in the, wow, they just got solved by Miami. So we don't know, like, where everything's negative with them right now. So maybe after this cools off, some other options will become available. I think the biggest thing, and I'm not one to place blame on coaches a ton. Bud refuses again. He doesn't make any adjustments. He is real stubborn with his philosophy, and the fact that he Giannis played, I think, 29 minutes per game in the series, albeit a game 4, I think he'll play like 8 because of the ankle injury. So you have to take that for what it's worth. But the first 3 games of the series, we kept talking about, where's Giannis? Why is he coming out at the 6-minute mark of the first and third quarters for, some rando Pat Connaughton or something like that?
Sure.
I don't get it. Like, how do you not play your stars, big minutes? And how do you not continue to make adjustments? He does a great job in the regular season. He has them humming. I mean, they're winning 70 to 75% of their games. I don't get how it doesn't translate to the playoffs. So maybe a change of scenery is needed there. You can bring someone in who can really unlock Giannis and even Middleton in the playoffs. But yeah, I'm not sure. The one thing I forgot to highlight with Miami too. I talked about almost everything physically on the court. I think one thing that helps them too, and they get this from Spoelstra and Pat Riley, is mentally. They're right there.
And Jimmy as well. Jimmy coming in there really shifts the sort of mind frame of that entire team, because, if you have a bunch of young guys who are not ready for that, like we saw in Minnesota, then they're going to break under the pressure. But this Miami team, they seem to gel with what Jimmy was throwing out there, and that's why it's working. They have young guys who are not afraid of the moment, who are like Tyler Hero is just like having some insane games in this series and whatnot. Like, you've got to have that sort of leader who's going to set the sort of framework for the rest of the team, and it starts with Jimmy, I think, even more than the coaches and the GM or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. You're always going to, the coaches can only say so much. So you're going to go as your best player goes. And Jimmy is, for all the slack and crap he's gotten from the Minnesota exit and even the Philly time, as well. I've always been Team Jimmy. I will always be Team Jimmy. I think he's a guy who just wants to go out there and compete, and he wants to win. And I don't really think there's that much else to it. A lot of guys you can say, oh, he wants to win, but he only wants to win on his terms, or he only wants to win when he's scoring 30 a game. And you do have those guys in this league. And I don't think Jimmy's one of them. We saw it in the series. He had, 40 points, whatever it was in game 1, and then he was like 3 of 8 from the field in game 2, and then flip-flopped the next couple of games. He's fine playing whatever role, and I think that is something that his teammates feed off of too. They know that, hey, any given night, any one of us can be the star. And our best player, Jimmy Butler, doesn't care who gets it done as long as they all get it done and they get it done together. And like I said, even in game 5, Milwaukee came out hot. They came out and, Butler had actually pretty bad first quarter. He had like 4 turnovers. He looked a little rattled as well, but they just composed themselves. I looked at my friend after the first quarter. I said, I know it's been a bad quarter. I said, but Spoelstra had time to watch everything. Butler had time to analyze it. They're going to go talk about it. They came out and played much better the rest of the game. And I don't think there's a ton of teams in this league that can do that. So, even if they run into Boston and have a bad half or a bad quarter, I don't think that they're a team that's going to fold under that pressure. And that's huge. The playoffs, I can't stress it enough how mental the game is, especially when it comes to the playoffs. It's really the difference between winning and losing a lot of times. And Miami is certainly, if not the toughest, one of the toughest mental teams that we've had, this season.
I think it's going to make for a really entertaining Eastern Conference Finals. And that was, something that coming into the second round that you and I discussed quite a bit was, the first round in the Eastern Conference was pretty much a dud. Like, so many sweeps, only one series was not a sweep. But we talked about how that top sort of portion of the Eastern Conference was very top heavy. And it showed here where, even though Milwaukee had, quite a number of games over Miami coming into these playoffs, this Miami team was very, very good and very, very prepared. And I think we expected them to give them a fight. We both called Milwaukee, I think, in 6 is what we decided.
Yeah.
I don't think we would have ever expected Miami to win in 5 games, but we both knew that Miami was going to give them a tough fight. And they gave them a tougher fight than I think anybody, even Milwaukee, would have expected. So it's going to make for a real fun final round. I hope that Boston does close things out tonight so we can kind of gear up. Because if Boston doesn't close things down tonight, then we talked about what we also talked about is that this Miami Heat team and Jimmy Butler going into the next series with a lot of rest. Yeah, it's not good for whoever they face. So I'm sure Boston's looking like we've got to close things out tonight. Otherwise, we might have to go into that next series with the other team having 5+ days off. So that'll be interesting to watch as well. Let's get into the other series. One of the other series in the game that happened last night, the Lakers. Little bit of a back and forth affair with the Houston Rockets, but able to pull away in the fourth quarter, winning 112-102. This was such a strange game, and you and I were going back and forth on Twitter a lot just because it was like, you as a Lakers fan are frustrated with the way that they were playing, and I had my own feelings about the way that the team was playing, but I think everybody can agree that LeBron, on the night that Giannis, his MVP competitor, went out in a sort of disappointing way, he went out there and dropped 29 in the first half, closed the game with, here I have it right in front of me, he closed the game with 36 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, incredible shooting marks, 60% from, or 56% from the field and 44 from the 3-point line. I mean, what we talked about, what we were going back and forth about was the defense, because the defense was not there, especially before the fourth quarter.
Right.
And Houston was getting a lot of baskets. They were getting their usual 3-pointers, and I don't think that LA was necessarily putting enough pressure on that. But what was more frustrating to me is that this Houston team is not the kind of team they're not going to go attack the basket. They're the kind of team that's going to shoot 40 3-pointers a night or whatever it may be. And to see James Harden getting to the basket with literally no pressure on him multiple times last night, Russell Westbrook doing it, PJ Tucker doing it a couple times. Like, there were so many guys on that Houston team who saw very little to no pressure at the basket. And this goes back to the rant that I had a few weeks ago about Anthony Davis, about why, he got the all defensive first team, but he's not. He just takes too many possessions off. He's not focused. Either he's not focused or he's not smart enough to make those plays. And it was really, really strange to see him pressuring out on the 3-point line. I understand that PJ Tucker is going to shoot 3 balls, and that is sort of what Houston's trying to do. They're playing small so they can stretch out the floor and open up the middle, but they're not really attacking the middle. They're still looking for those 3-point shots. So for Anthony Davis to be playing so far out to where he's not able to back and switch off onto Harden and contest him at the basket multiple times, it's upsetting to see. And you made the great point that Anthony Davis still had a good night numbers wise, but you look at the way he's actually playing, he's not playing well still. Like, he had a couple good games in that Portland series, but against Houston, he's not been the player that we saw in that latter half of the Portland series.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I was looking at his numbers, and they showed his playoff numbers, and he's shooting 58, 59%. It's like, I don't feel like he's shooting anywhere near that in this series, because I feel like he's been fading away a lot. He was better in game 2, getting near the rim. They clearly made that adjustment after his struggles in game 1. They got him some catches, balls, caught off the move and stuff like that, got him in a rhythm, but he seemed to stray away from it again last night, and definitely frustrating. And talking about defense, especially, I mean, he's their anchor. He's the last line of defense, especially when they're playing small ball, with Dwight Howard not playing, with JaVale McGee kind of being limited with the ankle, and Vogel. Thank you for not playing him in the second half. I was thrilled to see him sit. When they play AD at the 5, he's got to be the guy that covers for everybody, because no matter what game plan the Lakers are out there, Harden and Russ are too explosive, too crafty. They're going to get by Danny Green, Kyle Kuzma, Caldwell Pope, even Rondo. They're going to get by those guys, and they're going to put LA in situations where they got to react properly, they got to react smartly, and have good rotations. And AD is a huge part of that. It's the reason why they were so successful in the regular season. I think he had a much better defensive regular season than he's had here in the playoffs in the first 2 rounds. But a win is a win. LeBron obviously played phenomenal. On both ends, really. His offense was there. I thought his shooting kept him alive in the first half. There were possessions where nobody else was doing anything. AD didn't have an interest in doing anything, and LeBron was kind of really bailing him out with a lot of difficult shots. That I wanted those at the end of the game. I don't want those in the second quarter, but LeBron had to do it because they weren't moving the ball. And then on defense, I had 4 blocks in the game, and they all came in the third quarter. It was just like one after another. But those are momentum changers. These guys think they got free runs to the rim, and all of a sudden, it's not just a LeBron block. I don't think any of them actually went out of bounds. I think they were all blocks off the backboard, or the Harden one was blocked back into play.
I think in like 2 of them, and then the other ones, they bounced to another player on the court, and none of them went out. Yeah.
Right. And that's important, because it's, the big thing that I always read about and I've never liked with like a guy like Dwight Howard is he's happy to send the ball into the stands and make a statement, which is like all fun and good. But LeBron's blocks, they go off the backboard, they go to teammates, and now you're starting a transition. Especially with Houston, they always have the guy in each corner. So if you block it and the ball's going that way, now all of a sudden you got a 4-on-3, 5-on-3 if LeBron can get going with them. And you give the Lakers and LeBron those kind of numbers in transition, they're going to score more often than not. And then obviously their defense did crank up in the fourth quarter, especially that first 3-minute mark. They pulled the ace in the hole. That is playoff Rondo.
21 points.
I got to admit, I didn't see it coming. I guess I should have. I owe an apology. Especially after game one, I was like, man, he's rusty. I know the IQ is there, but he's not a good shooter. He's not this. And he just threw all that out.
Yeah.
He really was. He was fantastic, especially in that fourth quarter. Even stripping Harden once or twice, like he seemed to just combine everything. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that I don't think they're going to get that moving forward. I expect probably him to come down to earth pretty hard.
Yeah.
But when you get that, especially in the fourth, they're able to really. I mean, that was the game right there. They built like a 10, 11 point lead and really didn't look back. Kuzma had a good game too off the bench. I thought, especially in the third and fourth quarters. I mean, he was really good moving without the ball. He's cutting towards the lane, getting easy baskets. He's not the best defender, but I will give him credit. Like he's working at it. Like I've seen other guys that are his age that are just I can score the ball. I'll do whatever I want on defense. Yeah. He does try. He's giving an effort. And then of course the plus minus guy, Alex Caruso +7, making a couple of big shots there. So.
Everybody on the Lakers was plus. Nobody was minus. I don't think, looking at the box score and whatnot.
No, nobody was minus, but I just gotta, we always gotta shout out our point guard, Alex Caruso. But good win in the fourth quarter. Again, I'd like to see, like we discussed, better everything on defense, especially in the first half. You can't let Harden and those guys get runs to the basket. I'm okay. I can live with Westbrook making outside shots. I can live with Harden making step back threes. It happens. They're good players. They're going to make them. What I can't live with is Harden them getting free runs to the rim, and then PJ Tucker, who is noted as the best 3-point shooter we've probably had since they've really started keeping track of corner threes. But you're giving him wide open looks. You're giving Covington, who's streaky, and if he's on, it's dangerous. You're giving him open looks. Eric Gordon, I think they made Eric Gordon look like a superstar in this series for reasons that I can't explain. So they have a lot of things they have to tighten up. But at the end of the day, taking a 2-1 lead is the most important thing, and then they have responded well these last two games. It's not going to get any easier. It's going to be, I expect Harden and them to come out, firing in Game 4. You don't want to go down 3-1. So. We'll see what happens, but great game by LeBron and some of the other, the supporting cast there.
Yeah, here's why I get frustrated with people saying that AD is the defensive anchor of this team. He's going to check out. He's not going to be there 100% for a lot of these possessions. We saw it last night. We've been seeing it for years out of AD, and that's something that's frustrated me quite a bit, and that's part of the reason why he never won in New Orleans, and he needed to change teams. Because I know he didn't have the best supporting cast, but he had a pretty solid number 2 in Drew Holiday in New Orleans, and for him to not win more than he did in New Orleans, I think is a knock on his sort of quote unquote legacy as a whole. But also the difference is, last night he's letting guys get past him, and the difference is LeBron on a fast break at the buzzer gets a pin block on Rocco or somebody else, and the Rocco is there for the rebound, puts it in, but it is right after the buzzer. And instead of celebrating his block, he turns and starts yelling at Alex Caruso because Alex Caruso was not there, not back. And that's sort of the energy that this Lakers team was lacking a lot of last night. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that they'll be fine on in the long run. But if they don't put those pieces together and they continue to go out there a little bit lackadaisical, then they are going to continue to get into tight battles and possibly lose games that they should be winning. So that's just something that I think that this Lakers team needs to do a better job of. And I haven't been pointing in the direction of them feeling like they're going to do that throughout this playoffs and into the later rounds. I think they will lock in, round by round a little bit more. But you don't want to go to 6 or 7 games against this Houston team when you really can close them out in 5. And for them to be able to close them out in 5, they need to make those adjustments now. So that's just kind of where I want to close out there. Let's get into a little bit of Coach's Corner, a couple updates on coaching. Steve Nash being introduced as the Nets head coach, and Billy Donovan mutually parting ways with the Thunder after 5 years there. Is there anything you want to discuss here, noted Steve Nash fan, Jordan?
No, I mean, we talked about it a little bit, I think, last week with the hiring. Definitely caught everybody off guard, but when you kind of peel back the curtains, you see that, he's been tight with Durant. He even said today in the press conference, he's been friends with Durant since before he was in Golden State. So they've had almost a decade-long friendship. He's got almost 2
I always forget that Sean Marks played with him in Phoenix, too. I completely forgot about that.
Exactly. He's got a 2-decade relationship with him. He said Kyrie is one of his favorite players ever. He's got a good relationship with him. And I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast today. He's like the owner didn't make the decision. Even Sean Marks really didn't even make the decision. It was KD and Kyrie. So, all the BS that Stephen A. Smith was spewing about the other day, kudos to Nash for not, he basically probably answered in the best way possible today, saying that, his quote unquote white privilege allowed him to skip the line. But at the end of the day, this was a move that the players signed off on, as they often do. I feel like we kind of turn our eye to that. But the star players do have some input. Like LeBron does have input. Giannis would have input if he wanted. Like they do have that. So, we'll see what happens. Like we talked about, he was a really good point guard. He, was one of the most unselfish players you've ever had, and you'd like to think that that's going to translate over. There are a lot more point guards and shooting guards that get hired for coaching jobs than centers do, for the obvious reason that point guards are natural leaders. They're good at free flowing offense. We've had mixed results. We've had the Steve Kerr as the guard who's come in and had a seamless had the whole Warriors dynasty, and then we've had like Isaiah Thomas. So
or his predecessor in Mark Jackson.
Yeah, or Derek Fisher, or Jason Kidd's been like mixed results. So like it is hit and miss. But at the end of the day, they do have two of the. You have Durant, who's going to be a top 10 guy. You have Kyrie, who's anywhere from 10 to 20, and then if they keep LeVert, you have a young emerging star. If they trade him for somebody, then they could potentially have a big three. So like we talked about, they should be the favorite. It'd be interesting to see what Nash does offensively and how he handles. It's different. It's different being a TNT analyst, a player development coordinator, and then going to the bright lights, especially with big names on there. So we'll see what happens. The Donovan thing was definitely a little surprising too, but I think with it being mutual, I think that says more to Donovan being like, maybe, I don't want to say seeing the writing on the wall, but like they got as much out of this team this year as they possibly could, right?
They're not going to take this next step next year, is what you're saying,
right? And they're probably going to trade Chris Paul. SGA is going to get better, but like who else is really going to get better? Like Schroeder's been here a long time. He's not getting better. Mm-hmm. Danilo's not going to get any better. Same thing. Like I don't think there's anywhere, like they're plateauing here, at least until they have all those picks that keep coming in from the Clippers and stuff that they can rebuild with.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Donovan, he did well. I don't think he was like an amazing coach in OKC, but he did better than some other guys in this league. I think Chicago, they said, was the one that was looking at him.
Sure.
And anything's better in Chicago than Portland or whoever it was.
Yeah, it was Portland.
So we'll see what he can do. I mean, I think a big part of the season was Chris Paul, obviously, and his leadership and what he brought to the table. But I think you got to give Donovan credit for at least keeping the pieces motivated all year, and maybe he can do the same, wherever he goes next.
Yeah, Donovan is pretty interesting because when he came into that team, that team was looking to win now because it was in KD's closing years, and I was like, why are you bringing in a college coach right now to try to win a championship with a player the caliber of Kevin Durant? That is a terrible move, and I was pretty hard on Billy Donovan at the time because I just thought it was not a smart hiring, and it proved to be correct because they couldn't go the distance.
Right.
But he developed into a good NBA head coach. I don't think he's necessarily coach of the year candidate like a lot of people considered him to be this year. I think a lot of that did fall on Chris Paul, but I think he did develop into a very good coach in the 5-year span under good management there with Sam Presti as well. He obviously has a good relationship there. They talked about how he went into the office with and they drank like beers and just reminisced over the 5 years because of how good of a relationship they have. So I think he learned a lot in his time in OKC, and he's going to take that to wherever he goes next. Chicago could be a good sort of destination for him because he played with a lot of these sort of young up-and-comers in OKC this year, but also got that sort of leadership from Chris Paul that he can take away and now take to Chicago and say, look, you guys are all young. We don't really have a veteran star like Chris Paul, but this is what I learned in my experience from that team. And I'm hoping that we can bring that to the situation and take us to the next level. I can't really think of another sort of good place. I know a few people were throwing out Philadelphia, which I wouldn't mind actually seeing that there, but there are sort of other systematic changes that need to happen. If Billy Donovan's going to have success there, I think he would be a step in the right direction, but he's not going to get the job completely done there. So that would be interesting to watch. I don't know. Is there anybody that you could see even filling out OKC spot now that they do have a vacancy? Because there's not a lot of all-star coaches on the market.
No.
Kenny Atkinson's still on the market, right? And he's a coach that I really like.
McMillan.
Yeah, Kenny Atkinson is one of these coaches that I love. That it just wasn't the right fit in Brooklyn. He was ousted there, I think, a little bit unfairly. But I think he could do a lot of good work with this young OKC team, honestly, because he showed promise with the Nets.
I always thought that those Nets teams, no matter before they had KD and Kyrie and stuff, I thought they played extremely hard for him every night. In wins and losses when they were in postseason extension, when they weren't. And I think that speaks volumes to a coach when your team is playing hard regardless of the situation, because face it, a lot of these guys, when you're losing consistently, if you are losing consistently, you do have that tendency to kind of fold. So I don't think he'd be a bad choice. I think Nate McMillan's out there, and I thought he, got a little kind of
weird. Yeah, the weird
to
contract extension and then fired a couple weeks later. Yeah.
Yeah, but he did, I thought, a good job with the pieces he had in Indiana. I think Indy said that they were more likely going to go after potentially Becky Hammond as well.
Should be a great choice if they did that.
Another pop disciple. And then I think Indy would be a good place for her. I think obviously it'd be really cool to see the league's first female head coach. I think we've been moving towards that, obviously, and Becky has been at the forefront, and deservedly so. Obviously, if you're in a spot on Pop's staff, that's the ultimate, sign of respect. And I think Indy would be a nice place because they have a lot of pieces there, and it's not like it's a New York or like LA where like the media, whether fairly or not, would be, how the media goes. Like they crucify everybody when they do something wrong in a big city. Indy's like a nice, it's a good basketball town, smart fans, and there's not like a ton of pressure to win right away, but they have talent. So that'd be cool to see her there. But yeah, we'll see what OKC does. We talked about the Bucks having their offseason questions. I feel like they're going to be intertwined with the Chris Paul until something happens with him. So, I think they'll look to get rid of him just because he's not as great of a season as he had, proving everybody wrong. Me being completely at the top of that list of people that was proved wrong. I think, he is he's only getting older. He's only getting more expensive, which is not going to factor into OKC's plans. They have all these Clippers picks. They have, SGA. You have a foundation there, and you have, what's coming in the future. So for them, I think it's about shedding some salary. They might go through – now it might be like the rebuild. We might have been a year early with it. This upcoming year might be the rebuild. But I think it could be a quick turnaround. I mean, Sam Presti's shown he can hit on draft picks. I mean, he had Durant, Westbrook, Ibaka, and Harden in three consecutive drafts. Yeah. So I mean, he can hit on these picks if he does well with them. He could build around SGA, and they could be right back in the thick of things soon enough. And that obviously would be dependent on the coach. But we'll see. We'll see who, if anybody else gets axed at all during this time. We'll go from there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody else losing their spot.
The Rockets lose, D'Antoni's probably gone, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't, because he's got his contract up as well, so that would be an interesting to. I know that's something that a lot of the sideline report, like Jared Greenberg, has been like on the case there on the sideline trying to get the scoop on that. We'll keep a close eye on that because we'll be talking about stuff in the offseason as well. Let's close things out here. All defensive teams. Let's just move through this real quick, and my screen just froze, so I am trying to pull things up here. All NBA first team defensive team. Sorry, my screen froze. I'm trying to bounce back.
You're good.
Okay, I got it. Rudy Gobert, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Anthony Davis, Marcus Smart, Ben Simmons getting the first team spots. Brook Lopez, Kawhi Leonard, Bam Adebayo, Eric Bledsoe, and Patrick Beverley getting those second team spots. Anything surprising to you? I'm really glad to see Marcus Smart here on the first team. That was sort of the big thing that really jumped out at me. I think we expected it, but it could have gone either way, and I am really glad to see him show up here. I guess I'm a little surprised to not see more Celtics players here because of how good that team was. I know we discussed like Brown and Tatum both being potentials, but that's sort of the one thing that I wanted to hone in on as being a quote unquote surprise, I guess.
Yeah, definitely, and I don't think having Smart in the first team was a bad choice at all. He does a little bit of everything. He flops a little bit too much, as we see, but he does. He is fearless. He's fearless.
He's had some crazy plays where he's fallen out of bounds, fallen on the floor, picks it off, gets the outlet pass or whatever it may be. He's had some really impressive plays in these playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we raved about the play on Embiid where he was flying through the air, caught it, falling backwards, all that stuff. He's physically gifted. He has a high IQ, especially working with Brad Stevens. I think has helped him a lot too. He'll guard any, even if it's an Embiid. I mean, he'll give his best. So definitely well deserved. Obviously, Giannis was Defensive Player of the Year. Anthony Davis for all your hesitation with him. I think in the regular season, I think he was very, very good and very deserving. Same thing with Gobert and Simmons. If I had to pick like someone to remove, I might have cut Gobert. Not that he's not worthy, but you could have made the case for
Lopez or Bam.
Yeah, or Bam. Kawhi I think healthier. I think the reason that he hasn't been really on the first team in a while is because like he hasn't been playing as many games, and he's been kind of more on a cruise control. But I still think he was pretty destructive this year. Like I don't think there was any night where anybody was like, "Hey, I have an easy night against Kawhi." Like he's taking the night off. So you could have made the case for him, but overall, I think the teams were pretty good. It's Chris Dunn, I think, was the first cut, and Lowry as well. So there's a lot of good, for all the talk about how they don't play defense in the NBA. And don't get me wrong, there are nights and there are teams that don't. But there are a lot of individual guys that are just sort of fun to watch on that end of the floor. They're so smart, they're strong, they're everything. They're technically sound, they hustle. Like those guys, and they're fun to watch. So I enjoy watching most of these guys. Beverly's probably the one dude I really could just do without. But even him, you have to at least respect his overall defensive ability. He's not afraid to guard anybody from point guards to LeBron. So it was a good list. That's pretty much all I have for it.
Yeah, I don't have too much to comment on. I guess just one follow up and extension of the Chris Dunn being the next one up, and sort of what it shows me is actually the depth of defense in the guard position, because then you have follow up Kyle Lowry and Drew Holiday, and it just keeps going. And then the couple guards that we've discussed on this podcast that also got left off the list, and that's interesting to see, because I guess we talk so much about the big guys being the defensive stars, or even like you said, like a Kawhi or Giannis, these long big guys who are going to put a presence at the rim. But we don't often talk about how good some of these defensive guards really are. And it is fun to see, in a time where the game is definitely changing, and, a lot of up and coming players, kids, high schoolers, whatever it may be, are imitating Steph Curry and just shooting threes and whatnot. You have these guys who are sort of old school guards who are going to go out there, who are going to just go hard nosed and not be afraid to, like you said, play defense on whoever it may be. So I kind of have an appreciation for that, and just seeing the way that this thing broke down. I thought that was kind of cool. But I don't think I have anything else to add. So I think that'll bring us to a close for this episode of the podcast. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Be sure to follow our social medias down there. Also, be sure to follow Nuts and Bolts Sports wherever we can be found on our website, as well as on all social media platforms. And we'll be back Friday talking, I guess, some more Nuggets, some more Lakers after tomorrow's game. And we might have our sort of Eastern Conference Finals sorted out. So come back and join us then.